So we realized we're not so motivated with that, and we've seen many examples where the kind of idealistic and purpose-driven track changes to something else, to much more profit-driven. So we knew that if we switch to the Stuart ownership model, we probably can't raise more venture capital funding because of their mathematics and schedules. But we could raise money from, for example, angel investors and some funds that can operate with this model.
Welcome everyone to Startup Impact Series. I'm Nick van Breda.
And I'm Fionna Faulk.
So welcome everyone to the fourth Startup Impact Series already. We are here with Antti and Fionna, my colleague, and we are going to interview Antti about his company called Sharetribe. I saw him in a conference where he was talking about the business model of Sharetribe, and I was really enthusiastic about him. So I managed to get him on a call now, and now we can do an interview with him to ask him much more than just his business model. So welcome everyone. Maybe we can kick off with the first question, which is like very deep from the start. Let's actually do why. Why did you start such a company, and what is Sharetribe about?
Good question to start. So yeah, thanks for inviting. Nice to be here. And yeah, this reminds me of like these start with why mantras, which are good. And yeah, I'll tell a bit about our originating story, because it might not be the most typical or most the way how most purpose-oriented companies are started, because at least for us, it has been evolving throughout the journey. And a big factor in our starting was also like a good opportunity that me and the co-founder were working at the university in a research project where we did like our first marketplace, so to say, which was for the campus, just sharing resources with students. So selling old course books, renting out student apartments and things like that. And we got a lot of enjoyment and accomplishment from the feeling that we were able to help people recycle the old stuff and find services locally. Students could save money or earn money, and at the same time they met people in the local community on the campus. So we felt that it was like a win-win deal for the people and for the planet. So that was clearly the probably the number one thing that while working in a research project, we got motivated on boosting the sharing economy. And then it was further made easier for us to start a company that the research project was ending. It published the built code with the open source license, so we could use that. We already had the knowledge, and there was some like it was the early times of the startup hype in Finland in 2009, so to say. So before that, nobody talked about it much, and these days it's a big thing. So we've seen how things have been growing, and so that gave the courage maybe, but the real motivation probably came from this, that instead of just going somewhere to use my programming skills, we could build something that has some type of win-win deal built in.
Amazing. So your why, you started with it as a research project, it seems, right? You were studying back in the days, and you had this as like a final thesis?
Yeah, working on the master's thesis that was required to accomplish the studies. And me and a friend from the studies, we applied to the same project, and basically the research was aiming to do a research on how people use new kind of social media. It was also like a year or two after Facebook landed in Finland, so researchers were enthusiastic about what happens here, and then also this local resource sharing was part of the questions there. But we were both employed basically to build the software there, so we were not so much running the research side.
Okay, so to like summarize, it's a marketplace platform where people can build a marketplace for whatever they want to market, right? So they bring demand and requests and offering together.
Yeah, so the first thing was like a marketplace for everything in campus. And lately, like later on, the business model evolved so that instead of starting this marketplace for everything in different locations, we started focusing on the software and helping entrepreneurs and organizations who had their idea of a marketplace platform that they wanted to build. But with the existing tools that we had, we realized that we can make it much faster and cheaper to come up with the new marketplace online. So in order to kind of support the lean startup movement for marketplace startups so that they don't need to start building from scratch. Because at that time, there was already for web shops, like if you sell your own stuff, you could easily find web shops of different kinds, and nobody wanted to start coding that from scratch. But if you wanted to create a marketplace where actually your users will be the ones that come on your site and they add the offering, they add the rentable items or their services or what they are selling, then there was not so many options. So while we were building actually first for the university context, then we got contacted by people that, hey, could you help me with my idea? Could I do this with your thing? And that led us then kind of to a pivot in the business model and start serving the entrepreneurs and teams with ideas instead.
That's amazing. So now it's like a WordPress, but then for marketplaces.
Yeah, we have been using that kind of a comparison, especially in the early days, as our first product is similarly like it's the source code is available, so you can run it on your own server, or you could run it in the cloud on our server. And then we built like a newer product that has like a newer CMS comparison points, like a Prismic and Contentful being kind of headless CMS system, content management system of today, and the Sharetribe Flex that we built later is more technically more similar to there. But basically, WordPress is a good idea, like giving people tools to build their thing on the web.
Yeah, and how old is the company now?
It was officially founded in 2011, so 8.5 years in operation. Although there were those few years in the research project, and once we kind of shifted out from there, we were for a while officially unemployed, but trying to talk to people, like see if there is business here before we actually set up the company. So we had the first client basically signed up before we then filed the papers to set the company up.
Yeah, so maybe you can tell me a little bit more about the startup team. You were researchers or you were developers being employed by a school. Can you tell me a little bit about how this team was set up? Also after that study program, right? So some people continued and developed this company, and maybe others left it behind and went on studying or did a different job.
Yeah, actually, exactly. So that we were more students working in that project, and few of the school more permanent employees, and so, but there was like a handful, like 4 people working with these software tools, and some were doing their like bachelor thesis, and they continued studies after the research project ended, and me and the other co-founder were the only ones who got the spark, like that. Okay, let's start and a company around this. And actually later on we have hired 2 people that were working close to that research project also then, so that it was nice connections. They already knew what this was about, so it was easy to approach them in a later stage when we had some funding to do the hirings. But initially it was us 2 who kind of took the code and spin off from the research project, and then we had also a 3rd co-founder joining, as we met a Finnish person studying in Ireland at that time, doing business studies, and we thought that it's good to have like a business person as a 3rd co-founder, as we were both more technically oriented. And so when we officially started, we were 3 people splitting the company at that point. But then the 3rd co-founder, after a bit more than a year, actually got excited about also studying technology, and then he moved to London in a more intensive study program. So then he decided to leave the company for that point, because it wasn't time-wise and also interest-wise, he wasn't after all pursuing the business part there. But that helped us a little bit in the beginning, and a little bit also in the internationalization.
Yeah, perhaps Fiona, you can question from a different perspective, something about Antti's business.
You know it. So, absolutely. So thank you for sharing all that so far. I actually want to jump right into a quote from your co-founder, CEO, Juho.
Yep.
Because I feel like I am.
But, yeah, or Juho, we would say in Finnish, but yeah.
There you go. Don't let me be all American. All right. So Juho. He says this quote was actually originally shared in an internal memo, but you guys felt it was so important in terms of the mission behind your business that you decided to go ahead and put it out on Medium. So I'll read the quote. The purpose of the company is to democratize the sharing economy. The company aims to foster an economy where resources are utilized efficiently, created value is distributed fairly, and people have control over the conditions of their work. The memo goes on to talking about the three important issues we're facing today: environmental crisis, inequality, and then loss of meaning. So this whole document, I found it fascinating that someone would put that out there, especially given the type of business that you have. You don't have to mention anything about social impact, social good, these types of things. And I want to get into the change in the shift in business model as well. But first, let me ask you about this last one, loss of meaning. Can you dig in a little bit more on that for us and give us an idea exactly why that was so important and what exactly that really means?
Yeah, good question. I'm happy that you found the document, because we have been sometimes struggling like where to publish this kind of things that is for us is very important, and we hope to maybe highlight few of those things also in our website. But now we have this Medium blog called Better Sharing, where we kind of talk about these motivations. And as my co-founder also states there, this was like his internal writing about explaining what is his motivation there. Yeah. And the key point being that the big problems that he sees in the world today, we can actually, as a small tech startup, we could work a bit towards those. And this loss of meaning that he mentioned, I think it's seen maybe more in the Western world, perhaps, where we're kind of solved these survivalistic problems, and that maybe even like especially a couple of generations before, but also our parents' generation had this like, okay, let's leave the world as a bit better place to our children, and we are kind of. At least our generation here in Finland, like the high school student friends, we kind of are feeling that that's not a big motivation in life to leave get more money to give our children, basically. So it's more like looking at what big things are happening. What can we do? Like, we are well equipped in this world. What can we do to do good? And also I think there partially relates to what people find meaningful to do, which I think is partially related to why there's a lot of talk about impact and kind of podcast oriented on this, and people want to find out how the skills they have and the sometimes also privileged position that they're starting from, how could they help others with that instead of just finding ways to pass time, basically. Absolutely. And I think the relation there to our company is in terms of that. That the work is also in transition, so more and more people are offering their work through online platforms and marketplaces. So there, if we can democratize the system so that the people who offer their work have more things to say there, they will be less feeling like a cogs in the machine that are I'm just driving this Uber because I don't have other options and on the mercy of the big company. But maybe if I can create a cooperatively owned platform where I offer my work, I have more ownership. I be building on something and not just implementing a predefined role. Or then the people who start new marketplaces and become entrepreneurs because they have the tools more affordably available. So these are hopefully the ways where we can be helping with this kind of loss of meaning that we see in our generation.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. There's one other quote I love before I ask you my second question. It was actually the top quote in your the Stuart ownership article, which is that the purpose of the structure talking about steward ownership, is simply to make sure that our companies are in service of society, not the other way around. So I thought that was really cool. So on the topic of steward ownership, because it does come up, in that same article, and it's on the same vein. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people probably have not heard of steward ownership. And I think it could be an unknown concept for some people who actually might love the idea of it. Can you dig in a little more on why you guys decided to what exactly it is for you at your company and why you decided to make that transition, just briefly?
Yeah, I'm happy to explain. And definitely, as you said, it's not that well known concept, although it has been kind of modeled by some old foundation-owned companies.
Yeah, but not, I think it was developed, right?
Yeah. There had been companies like Bosch and Zeiss in Central Europe, like running with similar thing. And now a group in Germany started to look like how could modern companies adopt the same principles, where the primary purpose of the company is not the shareholder value maximization, but instead of some other purpose, like in our case, the better sharing economy, and the things that you quoted from the earlier article. And so how to keep that in the first priority seat and still be able to make profit, still be able to raise funding, still be able to compensate people who take risks. So I see it a little bit as a middle ground option between for-profit and non-profit models, because technically we are still a for-profit company. But as we decided 2 years ago to make this shift, we used this possibility that at least the Finnish corporate law gives, because it says that the primary purpose of a company is to create value for shareholders unless you specify otherwise in the articles of association. So we did specify otherwise, and stated that the democratization and the cycling of resources and the fair splitting of value created, and those things are in the core. And we split also our shares technically, so that we have separate shares for voting and separate shares for profit earning rights. Okay. Mm-hmm. And in the ideal scenario, this could maybe completely separate, owned by different people. Currently, people like me, I own from the both pools. But the idea here is that to separate the decision making from the motivation to maximize your own profit. So in addition of making them separate, we agreed with everyone who has taken risks. So the founders, the employees, the investors, that what is the maximum, what would be enough profit for you? And now we have pre-agreed that if the company starts generating enough profit to pay back, then it will be buying back those profit earning shares from people with predefined prices. So people know already how much they can get in good case. And well, in bad case, the risk is the same, that if the company goes bust, there won't be no money coming out. But the idea is that the same share doesn't have the vote and the dividend right, because then typically people want to use the vote towards maximizing the outcoming dividends. Yeah. So in the long term, if we manage to buy out all these profit earning shares, then the company will have still the voting shares, so the people can still decide. But there are a few limitations in place that we cannot circumvent the extra profit or capital to our own pockets. So then we would be operating closer to a non-profit model.
Cool. And I have one last question, unless I know, Nick, you're probably dying to get back in there. Do you care?
Go ahead.
All right, cool. It's on topic. So since we're talking about money and profit and things like that, in 2018, it seems to be right around the time you guys decided to transition into the steward ownership model. You raised a round of funding, $1 million or so, right? And so give us an idea, and you don't have to get into much detail, obviously, because it's a private company. But give us an idea of how that round of funding worked its way around to the employees, and kind of how you guys dispersed it, or what you decided to do with it, and how that played a role also in your ability to be able to transition business models.
Yeah. I'm happy to share. And overall, we have had this idea of like maximizing transparency when possible, and actually started writing a blog in Finnish, although only but about this topic before we started the company.
Oh,
It's
nice.
called like the Open Company in Finnish.
I love
But yeah,
it.
let's see. The fundraising. We knew what this fundraising was also part of the motivation to go to the Stuart ownership at this point, because we knew we needed more funding to finalize our second product, which was this like a headless approach to building marketplaces. And it was we have built it. It was we had the first versions out, but we knew that it requires a lot of work before it starts to generate enough income for us to be profitable with it.
Yep.
And we knew that if we raise another round of venture capital funding, we'll be selling more votes outside the company. And we will kind of be making the promise that, okay, we will continue on this fast track, pumping up more rocket fuel and trying to make it big. And then the investors would hope to exit at some point and maybe selling the company. And then we wouldn't know what happens after we sell the company. So we realized we're not so motivated with that, and we've seen many examples where the kind of idealistic and purpose-driven track changes to something else, to much more profit-driven. So we knew that if we switch to the Stuart ownership model, we probably can't raise more venture capital funding because of their mathematics and schedules. But we could raise money from, for example, angel investors and some funds that can operate with this model. So we did fundraising where we first basically discussed with few angel investors and one fund and agreed on what's the right risk level. And we came up with the multiplier of 5. So because, as I said, we agreed the capital returns cap with everybody. So we decided that we sell shares with 20 euros, and our promise is to buy them back with 100 euros after profitable years. So we use part of the profits for these buybacks. And then with the same conditions, we also opened crowdfunding. So equity-based crowdfunding with a platform here in Finland, but that allowed investors from other countries also. And then we did like a lot of communication to our existing channels and clients and people on our mailing list and Marketplace Academy and these things. And then we got a lot of interest. So now there is actually more than 400 shareholders in the company from more than 40 countries. So
That's
we
awesome.
The amount of money that they have to put in to get some equity, what is the starting point? Is it like crowdfunding is like $5?
It was 500 euros.
Mm-hmm.
So there was some threshold, but still relative. You didn't need to be like a pro investor to be part of this.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So you collected a certain amount via crowdfunding and another amount via investors?
Yeah. And in total it was about 200,000 from the fund that became the anchor investor, then maybe similarish amount from different angel investors, and then rest of the 1.1 million came from the crowdfunding investors.
And then you shared how many shares are like given away to people outside the company?
So those were, I think now, that's a good in calculation because they are like in tens of thousands, but basically 1.1 million. Let's see if I can use.
Like quickly calculated.
But yeah. So about 55,000 shares were given out then with a $20 price tag, and then you can quickly calculate that if we buy back those with 100 euros a piece, it's 5.5 million needed for that. So we need to be doing more than that in profits.
Yeah, is it maybe a little bit weird that you are giving away shares for $5 each and that you want to buy it back for 20, or is it not a little bit weird to buy back shares instead of reinvesting the money in product development?
Yeah, it's a good question. Where in our case, most of the investments that we do can be done within the fiscal year. So the agreement is that after the fiscal year ended, if there is a surplus, then out of those we pay out. but it's 40% of the earnings before taxes that is used for the buybacks, and the rest can be used for the company for investment and investing there.
So you have the margin you have in place is big enough to be able to buy back some shares every year.
And we are not yet profitable. So when we launched the crowdfunding, we knew that we need some funding to keep operating, and now we have been closing the gap. So hopefully within this year we will be getting to the profitable side. But then we need to be there for a while to get significant returns to the investors. But in some sense, this is actually close to a loan model where we agree about the price, but the time is variable. So it depends on how well the company does.
Yeah. So now after a while, you have all the investors and all the shares you've given away. Now that's not an option anymore to raise more investments.
Good question. It could be an option, but it's clearly more complicated than in a typical style where you raise multiple funding rounds and then there's some dilution happening. So basically, like in typical case, the older investors, there's some dilution, so their percentage goes smaller if you generate more shares and sell them out. So also here, we could do that, but then we need to agree what's the priority of the buybacks. And basically we would need, even though the investor shares don't have the general voting rights, they have some rights that if we change something, if we generate new shares or if we change something in how those are treated, then they need to agree. So if we negotiate with current investors that, hey, here is a situation, we would need a further round of funding, this is terms we suggest, then it would be terms of negotiation, but clearly it would be a little bit more tricky with the new funding round if the old investors have some kind of priority with the buybacks, for example. So it would be more complicated, so to say, but not impossible.
I saw that in terms of capitalism, the system of capitalism has changed a bit over the last 20 years since the internet came up. You see that there's a lot of companies like Uber and Airbnb trying to kill every competitor out of the market by giving such a low price that they cannot compete anymore. By making a loss for long enough, you outcompete all the competitors, like Amazon is also doing. How do you look at this? Like, you're creating this marketplace platform where new Ubers and Airbnbs are being able to be created. Once they grow bigger and bigger and get investors and stuff like that, they can follow the same approach as these companies are doing right now. And then they're like a takeaway competition and a Uber competition, and everyone will competing to become the next monopoly in the world, not just in your country anymore, but in the world. How do you look at this phenomenon? And this is growing different form of capitalism that is not really a fair competition anymore.
Good question. I feel it's this is a momentum that many Silicon Valley investors want to bet on the horse that becomes the next monopoly, and that this kind of style of funding kind of encourages maybe this behavior. And it's like with financial terms, it's easy to justify, but otherwise maybe not so. What we think overall is that they can operate at a loss for quite a long time, but at some point, if there is no real value created, if there is no real profit, then there is no value. Actually, it's just a bigger loss-making machine. So if it never happens, then it's more like a bubble or like a Ponzi scheme where the investors just try to sell their shares to someone else who believes it will be bigger, it will be profitable someday. And if there is a lot of this profit pressure, they will need to have like a high profit margin at some point. And at that point, that profit margin is basically the opportunity for challengers to appear on the market and then have either low or same pricing with more fair terms. Like that, if it's a taxi driver owned cooperative that has the same price and it doesn't need to operate globally, it could be that in one city, it's the challenger, and the local people might read about in the local newspaper that, hey, there is this that gives a better price to the taxi driver and less to the Silicon Valley investors. And both apps work very nicely. In both apps, you find enough drivers. Which one will you use? So not everybody will jump, but maybe enough people will jump on there. And I think there is the opportunity for cooperation on the local, like on competition or challenging the giants in the local level.
Yeah, you want to be the player that creates the access to marketplaces building. Yeah, you want to be a player that becomes a challenger maybe for these big giants.
Or we want to bring the tools, make the tools available and affordable so that these kind of challengers can appear without themselves collecting huge amount of venture capital to build the tools. So we're kind of lowering the threshold. But they still need probably money and for marketing thing and so on. So we cannot solve the whole thing, but we are doing our part in with the technology side.
Right. So that actually brings me to a really good question that I have for you, Antti. In terms of your user base, you guys seem super smart. I'm pretty sure you have that broken down in terms of demographics, maybe even psychographics, maybe even technographics. Given that low code and no code environments, which I'm a huge fan of, by the way, big fan of low code, no code. So given that, this is essentially a done for you solution, if you want your own marketplace with very little uptime, time to be up and running, what do the demographics of your users look like? Because when I think about it, here's where the question is coming from. When I think about the digital divide and the digital skills gap and who it impacts, obviously, the more money or the more affluent of a community you're in, or maybe even just the country you're in, oftentimes can determine your access to technical skills, education and knowledge and training. So I'm curious if there is, a parallel between the types of people who signed up for your platform, or just kind of what type of demographic you're seeing, if it matches the demographic that's usually disadvantaged by not having those skills readily available in that training.
It's a good question, and unfortunately, I don't have any like a numeric thing. We haven't split it up that much actually. Like we have been thinking in terms of like personas, what are the typical in cases, which I can tell about, but that would be actually very interesting. That are we, by making this available, are we able to reach a different demographics and maybe a bit more of the underprivileged ones also. Yeah. But I have to say it still requires some money available. Like even though the first month is free, still our cheapest service starts from $80 a month. So people need to be ready to put in something. So sometimes we get contacted from the low-level income countries and like, hey, do you have special plans for here? And we're like, sorry, not yet. We do have the source code and things like that.
Yeah.
But and the other one, like exclusive factor kind of is that the payment gateways that we currently use, they are also have better coverage in the Western world.
Right.
But then inside those, yeah, it's hard to say. Like we do have a bunch of people who are clearly not like typical tech entrepreneurs who are into some niche like art lecture marketplace or pet sitters or parent-to-parent rentals or this kind of like that are not so typically money-oriented business ideas. And then we have some who have been like a starting earlier startup already, and now they want to start the next and stay very lean and use existing tools. And so there's a bunch of variety, and even though I speak a lot with them, I feel that I'm biased to make up any numbers. But just I can say that there is a lot of variety, and that's something that also makes our work very nice. That we see surprising kind of people to come with surprising ideas when you kind of put the tools out. You see them used in creative ways.
Nice.
So I wonder if that's something maybe in the long-term vision of the company that you would like to be able to provide, that you are creating this marketplace platform for underprivileged, like the favelas and the people in the less fortunate places on Earth. So do you have any plans in the future to facilitate them? For example, if they're an NGO, they can get this platform for free or for a freemium model where if they want premium tools, they pay extra.
It's a good question. We have had that in discussions a few times, and I think there has been like for non-profits, there has been a discount on certain packages. One limiting thing has been the payment gateway support that for example in many African countries they have actually quite developed mobile payment things there, like the M-Pesa and such, but we haven't built the integration there. So for us, managing multiple integration has been kind of a burden. So we haven't wanted to add something, especially at this stage of not being profitable. So there is clearly, we can also see that we are financially incentivized to focus on the bigger markets at this point. And but one thing has been that from the Sharetribe Go, the simpler tool, the source code is available. So that has been used in some cases, like someone in India built something for the rice farmers to let other people know about the excess or the needs or something like that, and it was running on their own site, and so independent from us, they just took the code and started developing on that. So at least in one way we can be helping there, but it hasn't been very coordinated operation at this point.
So there's no like instructables course of how to use the open source code that you have for setting up such a marketplace platform, not on the cloud, but on their physical computers and their own data centers.
There are like simple instructions, and then there is like a community forum where people can ask. So basically, a more dedicated support comes with monthly subscriptions, but we do host forums so that everybody, even if they use the version on their own server, could get some help.
Even I think people even with without the technical background sometimes can figure out how to spin up a server and get this stuff downloaded in the right places and at least get it functional, and then have a professional take it over from there and our thing is not like a super easy. I wouldn't recommend it as for someone non-technical, but in general I do recommend that also the first servers that I'm kicking up was not because the university course taught me so, but because of reading online instructions and then trying through trial and error. So it is possible, but
In terms of long-term vision, can you share anything about that? What would be if your mission get accomplished? What would that world look like?
Good big question. I would say that now we see the landscape of marketplaces being dominated by the big players, and we see more and more people who offer their livelihood is dependent on the marketplaces. And there we think that the monopolies are a little bit like a scary looking situation. So if our mission is successful, then there will be more variety there. So maybe smaller players, maybe with various ownership model, like we wanted. We realized this problem with the current default ownership model, and we switched ourselves to the Stuart ownership, and we believe hopefully there would be Stuart ownership marketplaces more, and maybe this cooperative model. I think it's very good for those marketplaces where people, their primary work is through the marketplace. They would be also owners there. I think that solves part of the current day issues. So having more and more those options, it doesn't mean that the current giants need to disappear, but giving people choice. And I think one big motivating factor, like I started in the beginning of the interview with the why we got started in the first phase. Then later on, I got motivated about the democratizing of the sharing economy because we started to see the dark side of the gig economy. And now the most recent motivation came from this Stuart ownership thing, because I believe that spreading also this information, this alternative model could nudge the capitalism towards a better direction in a non-violent way, where companies themselves can choose to limit their own greediness, so to say.
The dark side of the gig economy. What did the dark side look like? I'm so curious.
I think the dark side is that when the early premise of the sharing economy was like, as I said, this kind of win-win-win deal that people save money and they can earn money and they get recycled things, so there is less need for new resources to be built, less material use, they get to socialize and meet each other without the middlemans. But then what has been happening also in reality is that many people work with very low pay as the food delivery or car service or cleaning or home repairs, and that getting away of the middleman also got away of some of the worker legislation and some of the worker benefits that the unions have been working for decades. And now suddenly everybody is a micro entrepreneur and they take their own risk of not having good pensions or sick leaves or things like this. So actually the situation of a worker in a precarious position is worse off than it used to be. And that's, I think, a very sad development.
I totally agree. But to get off the sad train, I'm going to go back to hashtag micro entrepreneur. I think that's going to trend. Hashtag micro entrepreneur. That's I think you just created that hashtag, and we're totally going to use it.
Yeah, I think it has been used, and it's definitely also a very positive thing that today you can become a micro entrepreneur. Like if you lose your job, for example, you are not on the mercy of the job market anymore so much, because you can start doing little things, maybe earning part of your income. But then again, the position in many people it seems like it's not that pleasant. So maybe, I don't know if it's a regulation or what we feel that our part maybe is there are more fair marketplaces where to do the micro entrepreneurship at.
Yeah, definitely. Cool.
So in the end, like if there's a moment where you are going to leave the company, shut down the company, perhaps, like there's a lot of social entrepreneurs that have an end goal. If this is being arranged, I don't have to exist anymore. What would be your end? What would be your end goal?
Yeah, I hope that in a personal sense it doesn't come that there are new ideas, but as a company, will it come? And that's a good question also that we've been asked now that we are in the Stuart ownership model, that will it too much lock us to be like a foundation of single purpose and we can never change in 100 years? But what I would believe would happen is kind of shift in the mission. If people still feel that this is a mission worth pursuing, but if the sharing economy gets very fair and democratic and there are no problems as today, then probably we would have a harder time recruiting new people on to work on this mission if it doesn't feel like a problem worth solving anymore, which would be a good thing. So then that would maybe lead to the dismantling, and hopefully by that day we have also paid back to all the investors and risk takers, so we wouldn't have the pressure from there to keep the company running just to generate extra income for someone. It seems like a long way to go. But yeah, that's an exciting question in terms of thinking. When will this be completed? And also kind of that it's not the point of doing something just for the sake of doing, but actually get something changed.
Yeah, like build a legacy for the next generation, maybe for the 3 next generations.
Yeah.
In 2100, they have a totally different starting point.
Yeah. And the point that the company doesn't need to exist just because somebody bought the shares and they hold on to that value. So in that sense, if the shareholders of that time would decide that this is no longer needed, then they could check what is the capital we have, what could be done with this, as long as they don't dismantle the company and put it in their own pocket. So there are limitations to that. But for example, it would be possible to donate things towards something on the similar mission. Yeah.
Well, I've heard a very interesting business model, which is about life cycles in the real estate industry. So when people are buying a house, they age, they need different housing, they have different housing needs, they build a family, then they retire, and then they have a pension, then they live alone again. They have different cycles where they need some services. In the end, they will need a lot of home care and all of that. In the beginning, they don't need a lot of space. They just need like 30 square meters to live and study in. And then they need a family, so they want like 150 square meters. And it was a Thai company. What they thought of is like, okay, create like a social technology where you have you build up loyalty points. The longer you rent from this service model where you can API everything into it. Like, okay, home caring, and then I need more boxes. I need more spaces for my children. The more and the longer you live in such a platform and be part of a platform, the more you can give over to your grandchild. So once you die, they will receive the points, and they have a bigger opportunity of getting a starter's house or getting a family house. These kind of incentives I really was like fascinated about, and I wonder if that's something that you already thought of, like such a life cycle incentives. When you are buying back all the shares when the company becomes profitable, it becomes like you will be like with the people that work for the company will be also that VC that owns everything, right? Yeah, like 90% of the shares. So how do you look at these kind of business models that are about life cycles and are giving over to someone else, like in a study organization, you're giving it over after a year to a new student group?
Interesting questions. And I have to say we haven't thought so much what happens like on the stage of paying everything back. We have like kept more on the focus of first getting to the profitable line, but naturally a little bit thinking because we did the shift that regulates also that part.
Yeah.
And one important thing here is that then when the company doesn't have outstanding profit earning shares, it doesn't need to create profit. So hopefully that would allow us to lower the prices or whatever feels like the best way to spread these tools and help make the gig economy situation better. And in terms of like sharing or the continuity of things in the steward ownership, the idea is that the company is not like a commodity that can be sold to someone else, or somebody owns it and then is sold forward or slaughtered someday or something like that. But it's more like that it exists, has a life cycle. It works towards the purpose, and the people are like stewards of that. So the people who hold the voting shares are the stewards who decide how to navigate the company. And there at the moment, me and the co-founders still have a big part of there. Some have been shared to the team through purchases and options, but we believe that it would be better to be even more equally spread, so that people, when they join the company, when they have been here for a while, they have the opportunity to become one of the stewards. And this in the steward ownership, it's not regulated how to do it. So some companies have like a group of 10 who are managing. Some companies spread the voting power to everybody. So we haven't yet actually picked our model. So we'll still stick with the few grandfathers or the founders, like having the official votes. But this is something we hope to design soon, that how to give the feeling for everybody who joins that they have real power. And then the new generations of employees, when they keep joining, they will be kind of overpowering at some point in the voting power. So in that sense, the decision making can also become like a change of generation, you younger perspectives. So over the years, once hopefully we get forward with the mission, there can be steering actions that, hey, now actually what we have and what we can do is more needed here. So do we agree that let's make this kind of change? So I don't think that we work 50 years with this single goal, but instead I believe there will be steering movements.
Yep. All right. Last question. I got dibs on it. All right. So we talked a lot about, or this last portion, we talked a lot about kind of what would you do, what would be your end game. I know you guys are still working toward hitting that, profitability mark, which is amazing. Let's finish off on, tell us, or tell everybody who's watching this or listening to this, what you need to get there and how people can help your company, your organization, your mission. What do you need?
Thanks for asking. That's always a good question. I feel currently too many people who have ideas of marketplaces, which could be very simple, like that we have these handicraft people in our town, or this hobby group that has something to offer, and anywhere where people would need to meet over some kind of transaction or trade or rental. They still think that this should exist, but it's very they might still think that it's very expensive and risky to start building one. So if you're listening and you have an idea like that, or you have friends who have been playing with some idea, it's good to spread the word that it's actually very low risk to try things out. Because with the Sharetribe Go, you can start the online site in like few clicks, in a couple of minutes, and in one day kind of customize it towards your needs. And then you have a site where people can come up, set up their payment info, start offering their services or their tools for rent, and start earning money immediately. And we have some stories of a guy who in one weekend set up like a music studio rental business. That is actually one of our bigger clients today. So they have been very nice, like a very bootstrapping stories. So yeah, spreading the info that today being a lean startup and following this like a no-code movements that you also mentioned. Mm-hmm. You don't need to be a coder in order to like do a very quick testing of some idea. So if it's a marketplace, then we have good tools for that. But if it's something else, there are a lot of no-code tools around. So encouraging experimentation and getting those ideas out there that you have.
So how many are we talking about? So how many for this year? How many marketplace platforms should sign up this year to make you a profitable business?
We currently have a bit over 800 running with the Sharetribe Go, and maybe 80 on the Sharetribe Flex, so the newer product. And I think what we've been projecting, the Flex has been now growing faster, and if we get there close to 200 this year, then that would be enough to get us to the profitability. And meanwhile, we expect the Go also to be growing, but it's a bit more moderate as it has been in the market for a longer time. So kind of doubling a bit more from the 80 or so that we have now. That's what needed.
Totally attainable.
Yeah, definitely. Because we are, I think, year ago we had 10, 20, 30, I don't know, but most of those came during the last year. So yeah, with the current track, we are nicely on the way there. And now with the latest financing, we have still plenty of money in the bank. So as a startup, we are in the quite safe zone at the moment.
That's great. Yeah,
that's a good place to be.
So, yeah, it's nice. After all the riskier years, even if you still have to calculate the runway, but when it's like a 1.5 years, it feels like that. Yeah, it used to be like 6 months or less at some point. So we can kind of breathe easier.
Cool.
Yeah, more to breathe. Huh? More to lean back and make sure that you will make up your profit for upcoming years. So I would like to thank you for this. A lot of these amazing insights that are very useful for many listeners that are starting a business. And maybe you want to end up with something like a quote or some tip, like final advice for starting entrepreneurs from your experience. Maybe you want to share a final sentence to finish up this amazing interview.
Yeah, I would say one of the most important things for me is the personal motivation. And for me, it has varied. Like I started with the original why is different than the why in the middle. Then it's what is the most empowering why for me now. And for everyone, my advice would be to like take care of your personal motivation and observe it. Like it can be seen as a plant that it grows to some direction, and then you can sometimes cut it a little bit if you don't want it to go that way. But if you can freely allow it, if you can be in an organization or environment where you can allow your motivation to grow, and if you can be doing that, what you feel most motivated, what you feel that you're good at and that the world needs, and if in this kind of a interlinking point, if you can stay there, then probably you'll be doing your best work. And for the organization, it's very good to try to allow that for your employees, and that's also part of like what I internally am most motivated now working here at Sharetribe, so that people could have that kind of momentum space to stay on the sweet spot of their motivation. So I'm wishing that for all, and want to remind that it's also up to you. Like regardless of the situation you are in, probably there's something that you can tune towards making it more motivating for you, what you do right now.
Nice.
Great advice. Also in your company, giving everyone that works for a company this space to work on their personal driver. That's amazing. That's also one of my wishes, and it's a great tip. Be good at it and make sure that people need it in the world. Thank you very much. And we catch up with each other whenever you're back in the Netherlands, and then we can have a physical cup of coffee. And if anyone that wants to reach out to you reaches out to us, what is the way to reach out to you from that point?
You can find at sharetribe.com you can find a lot of information about us, and then me you can find in Twitter, or I don't use that much, and emailing Antti, so my first name at sharetribe.com. Some might be slow, but I typically respond, so I don't get that overwhelming amounts these days. And and as you mentioned, that Finland being on your list, so if you come this way, also the offer for physical coffee cup is here. So
great, I'd love to.